All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Today we are going deep on The Anxious Generation, a book by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah,
You hear of this one?
I have,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's been making some waves, and
Hmm.
we thought it'd be a really good one to kind of pick apart and see what we think.
For sure.
Essentially, it's all about
Yeah.
this kind of explosion
Mhm.
of anxiety and depression we've been seeing, especially in young people.
Right, and how, technology and parenting choices play a role in that.
Yeah. And I think
Uh-huh.
one of the things that he kind of points out that's really interesting is this idea of the great rewiring.
Yes.
Have you read about that part?
I have. I think that's a really interesting concept, how,
Yeah.
childhood has changed so much, even in just the last, decade or two.
Yeah.
Kids used to spend their time outside playing, building forts, whatever it was.
Totally. Yeah.
And now it's so much more screen time, so much more kind of structured activity.
Right.
And it's like we've rewired their brains almost.
And we're seeing like the consequences of that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the book really lays out this like massive increase in anxiety and depression. And what's crazy is it's really specific to younger generations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you don't really see the same trends in older adults.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly something's going on here.
Right. And he really argues that a big part of it is this decline in what he calls unstructured play.
Yeah, yeah.
Like kids just aren't getting the same opportunities to take risks and fail and figure things out on their own.
Right, and like learn how to be resilient, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And then on top of that, you have this trend of kind of overprotective parenting where parents are, so worried about their kids' safety and success that they're not letting them kind of, experience the world independently.
Right,
Well,
right. So it's like a double whammy, right?
Right.
You've got the lack of free play, and then you've got parents who are maybe like overscheduling them or hovering too much.
Exactly.
And that's where the phones and social media come in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the book really goes into detail on what he calls the 4 harms of smartphones and social media.
Right.
And it's not just about limiting screen time. It's about the way these things kind of change the way kids' brains work and develop.
Exactly.
So can you remind me what those 4 harms are again?
Sure. So the first one is social deprivation. Kids are spending so much time online that they're not getting that face-to-face interaction that's so important for developing social skills and empathy.
Right.
Then you have sleep deprivation, which we all know is, terrible for our mental and physical health.
Mm-hmm.
And then attention fragmentation, this myth of multitasking, where kids are constantly switching between tasks and they're never really focusing on one thing for very long.
Yeah, it's like their brains are being trained to like jump from thing to thing to thing, and it makes it hard to like focus on anything deeply.
Exactly. And then finally, there's addiction, the way these devices and platforms are designed to keep us hooked.
Right, right. And so all of that, combined with the lack of free play and the overprotective parenting, it paints a pretty bleak picture, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. And then you layer on top of that, the social media piece, the comparison, the perfectionism, the unrealistic standards. And it's no wonder that, kids, especially girls, are struggling with self-esteem and body image.
Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other
Yeah.
like layer of pressure, right?
Yeah.
Especially for girls, I think.
Definitely.
So it's like they're already dealing with all this stuff, and then they're constantly seeing these, perfect images on social media, and it just makes it even harder to feel good about themselves.
Right.
So what does Haidt say we can do about all this?
Well, he does offer some solutions, which is encouraging.
Okay.
He talks about changes in parenting, encouraging less screen time, more outdoor play, even educational reforms. But I think one of the most interesting things he talks about is fostering deeper social connections.
Okay, yeah, tell me more about that.
So, he talks about encouraging kids to be more active in their communities, volunteering, joining clubs, things like that.
Right.
And he also talks about exploring spiritual practices like mindfulness, which can help kids develop self-awareness and coping skills.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaway here is that, we need to be nurturing real-life relationships instead of virtual ones.
Mm-hmm. It's like, how often are we actually present with the people we care about instead of being distracted by our phones?
Right.
I know I'm guilty of that sometimes.
Me too.
It's like you're at dinner with your family and everyone's on their phones.
Mm.
And you're like, are we even connecting here?
Yeah, that's a real problem.
Yeah. So it sounds like this book is a real wake-up call, huh?
It definitely is.
Like for all of us, not
Right.
just parents, but educators, policymakers, everyone,
Absolutely.
we need to be aware of these challenges and start taking steps to address them.
I think so, yeah.
So what's one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think, Hate's book really makes you think about this idea of resilience
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is for kids to develop those coping skills.
Yeah.
And I think, one question I would leave listeners with is this. Could this rise in anxiety be a sign that we're over-reliant on technology to cope with life's difficulties?
Mm-hmm.
Are we missing out on those kind of age-old, non-technological ways of building resilience?
That's a good question. I think that's something for all of us to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up for today.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
That's good.